Ooh. Hey guys, welcome to another week's episode of GetPsyched, where we look at all things mental health and psychology. Don't forget to subscribe to us too for weekly content. You can hit that little bell next to the subscribe button and you'll get weekly reminders every time I upload as well. And if you're enjoying today's video, make sure to hit that like button and you can comment on the video and I'll be sure to get back to you. How do we manage mental health when things get tough? Listen, managing our mental health during difficult times isn't easy, but on today's episode of GetPsyched, we're going to be looking at how we can manage our mental health during difficult times. We need to keep in mind a couple of things when circumstances change. When it comes to managing our mental health, we need to recognize when circumstances change. We need to understand that it can feel isolating at times. We need to understand also that we can feel out of control, and that's understandable. But we also need to recognize that there are things that we can do to manage our mental health when times get tough. The first point that we need to consider here seems a little bit obvious, but actually it's probably the biggest point that we need to consider when we're managing our mental health during difficult times. And the first one is to actually recognize when we're experiencing challenging circumstances or when our circumstances have changed to become more difficult than they were. I see a lot of clients in therapy, and often it takes a couple of sessions for us to get used to the idea that a client's circumstances have changed. Often it can be really challenging to recognize that. Sometimes people just go about their lives as normal, not really feeling or thinking that anything has changed, but they see changes in their mental health. When they actually take stock of what's happened over the past few weeks or the past few months, people start to recognize that actually, I've gone through some really challenging times recently, or there's been massive changes in my life that would equal challenges with mental health. One of the first things we have to do is we have to recognize when we're going through a crisis or when we're going through a difficult time and how that can have an impact on our mental health. So how do we actually do that? How do we start to recognize, or how do we start to accept that maybe our life circumstances have changed? And if you're watching this video currently in the summer of 2020, you'll recognize, with coronavirus going on and lockdown going on, that there's life circumstances that have changed. How do we start to recognize that? How do we start to accept that? One of the first things we've got to do is we have to take stock. And that can come in the form of actually journaling or writing these things down. It's something I do a lot with clients actually. When we're starting to appreciate or accept just how much life circumstances have changed, or how things have got tough recently, or how things have got difficult, and how we can manage mental health. And in that, one of the things we can do is take stock, so we can write down, what were things like 3 weeks ago? What were things like 3 months ago? What were things like last year? And how have they changed? When we start to recognize just how much life circumstances have changed, or how things have got tougher or more difficult, that can be a really effective way of recognizing that, and it can be a really effective way for us to accept it as well. Recently, actually, there was a study done in Edinburgh University that said that individuals who were who recognized and more accepting of life difficulties or changes in circumstances were much better at being able to manage their mental health during those tough times. So fundamentally, what this says is, if we want to manage our mental health better during difficult times, we have to understand and recognize and accept that life circumstances have changed, that we're maybe going through a crisis or we're going through a really difficult spell in our life. If we're able to recognize and accept that better, we're going to be able to manage our mental health better. I'm actually thinking a little bit more about this concept of acceptance or recognition of life circumstances, because sometimes I think that kind of thing can seem a bit abstract, a little bit vague, maybe even a little bit obvious. But you look at an example like this, somebody who is in denial of those life circumstances, somebody who is in denial of the challenges that they're facing or the ways in which their lives have changed, if they're in a crisis or trauma or a loss, if that person is in denial of those circumstances, are they better equipped to manage their mental health? No, they're not. Of course they're not. We need to have that level of recognition and acceptance, and you'd be surprised, well, obviously you would because you'd be in denial, of how much we are in denial of some circumstances in our lives, or rather how much situations affect our mental health. And I think we've got this kind of suck it up and see attitude in society, and it may even be applicable during the time of coronavirus, where we just kind of get on with it. We're expected to work from home, we just deal with it, we just do it. But actually what we need to do in order to manage our mental health better during tough times is take stock, is to recognize and accept that actually our life circumstances have changed, or they're more challenging than we first appreciated. What do you guys think in this first point? I'm really keen to understand your thoughts. Maybe you've got a question, maybe you've got some your own points of your own. Make sure to comment down below. I'll get back to you and we can have a little chat about it. Also, if you're interested in some extra reading about how recognition or acceptance of challenging circumstances such as crisis or any kind of changes in life circumstances when things get difficult, if you're interested in reading a little bit more, there's a reference to a book down below in the description called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It's one of my favorite books. You might actually be able to see it in the bookcase behind me. But if you want to know more about how accepting life circumstances or accepting difficult times can be beneficial to managing mental health, you're going to want to read this book. It's an extreme example, but it's an incredible read, really applicable to what we're talking about today. Likewise, I've got a bunch of my favorite books down there, top books in mental health and psychology, so make sure to check out the description. You can click on the link and go buy the books. The next thing that we need to do is we need to continue a bit of a developing of an understanding of what it means when life circumstances change or when we experience crisis. And that comes in understanding what our brains do. Our brains do a number of really interesting things that with a better understanding of that, we can help manage our mental health a little bit better. Firstly, what happens when we experience a difficult time in our life, when we experience a crisis or a huge change in circumstances and our mental health is inevitably going to be affected, the hippocampus, which is located in the kind of center of the brain just here, which is also part of the limbic system, which includes the thalamus, which is the part that relays sensory information between parts of the brain, the amygdala, which is that little almond bit at the very base of the brain, which is our primal emotional response system. That part of the brain, the hippocampus, which is fundamentally part of our memory sources, which is like the center of our memories. Now, neurology is never as black and white as what I'm making it out to be right now, but basically that's what the hippocampus does. And when we have those changes in life circumstances, the hippocampus kicks in. It hits that stress button, and the adrenal gland therefore releases a hormone called cortisol into the body. And that's in order for us to get ready for stressful situations. That's to kind of heighten our adrenaline. That's actually a good thing in circumstances like this. We need that to happen, but we can only have it at a certain level. So if the cortisol is too high in our body after the hippocampus is kicked in and after the adrenal gland is kicked in, the hippocampus can't do what it's meant to do because it just shuts down because the cortisol is so high. So for example, if a tornado, I know it's unlikely in the south side of Glasgow, but if a tornado came through my living room right here, the hippocampus would want to utilize memories and understandings of what to do in a situation like that. You know, what would be the most safe behavior? What would be the right thing to do? But my cortisol would be so high that the hippocampus just wouldn't be able to function. It needs to wait for that cortisol level to reduce. Now, again, all of this is normal, but what often happens is our cortisol levels spike so high and they stay there for so long, we get so stressed out that our hippocampus, which is using those logical memories, which is using that logical information to help protect us, just can't function properly. Now, that cortisol level spiking isn't just when we have a massive flash flood outside our house or that tornado comes through the living room. It happens when we have changes in life circumstances. It happens when we're going through difficult times. That could be the loss of a job, that could be the relationship breaking down. Our cortisol levels, our stress factors increase really rapidly, and often it's human nature, but they can stay very, very high. And as a result, the hippocampus can't do its job properly. So we understand a little bit better that although our brains can have good intentions, they can get in the way a little bit when we're trying to manage our mental health during these tough times or during difficult times. So what do we actually do about that? Well, it firstly comes back to our first point. We need to recognize that we're going through a crisis. We need to recognize that we're going through a difficult time And I know that that sounds really basic, and obviously we're always going to be able to understand that. It's absolutely not the case. We need to really engage with the fact, have these situations changed for us? Are we going through difficult times? And accept that. Secondly, we need to learn from experience. We need to learn from maybe our own behavior, but we can also learn from firsthand, but we can also learn from secondhand as well. We can learn lessons of what other people do. And that's sometimes how these videos can be quite helpful, because I can give some points and some tips, maybe things that have worked for me, maybe things that haven't, things that have worked for my clients and things that haven't. And actually that secondhand experience can be really useful for you when you're managing your mental health during a difficult time. There's been research that's actually conducted on this that says that people that haven't even necessarily gone through trauma or crisis can manage their mental health well enough when they learn from secondhand experiences. So when they learn from other people, they can use that experience to help inform how to improve or manage their mental health during tough times. So actually watching this video can be a really helpful measure for you to manage your mental health during difficult times. So take a step back, accept that you're going through a challenging time, and think about what would be the most optimal or positive behavior to move forward and help improve that mental health even in spite of those challenging circumstances. So how else do we actually manage our mental health during difficult times? We've had a look at the neurology of what happens in our brains a little bit. Again, it's not as black and white as what I've said, but that's kind of like the basic structure of what happens neurologically speaking when we're going through changes in our life circumstances or when we're going through tough times. We also need to recognize that we're going through difficult times, and we need to accept that we're going through those challenging circumstances. I think one of the things that's been really challenging during the coronavirus currently is that people have felt like they just have to continue on as normal, that we just have to keep going. We're working from home, we need to be just as productive and functional as we've always been. And it's okay to not be. It's okay to accept that this is the pandemic of a century, and actually that's really hard to manage. and that it's acceptable that your productivity might dip a little bit. It's acceptable that your mental health might struggle. I know that we live in a world that says we need to be overcoming all the odds, but there needs to be a level of acceptance that things are tough right now. And when you go through a trauma, when you go through the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job, the breakdown of a relationship, whatever kind of change in life circumstances that is, whatever kind of difficult circumstance that you're facing, you always need to say, do you know what? Given the context and given the circumstances, it's okay for me to feel like this right now. That's a really, really important point. A little bit of self-disclosure here. I am one of the worst people for taking my own advice. I can be quite a hypocrite sometimes, and I'm very good at informing people in my therapy room. I'm very good at giving advice on GetPsyched, and not great sometimes at taking that. And one of the things that I have struggled with during coronavirus is thinking I need to be more productive in the time that I've been given. And that's been really challenging because I've started to develop, and I suppose I've had this for a number of years now, but I've started to develop this kind of work guilt. I'm sure many of you can kind of can empathise, where I feel an incredible amount of guilt when I'm not working. You know, I wake up very early and I work. Sometimes I work into the night as well. And if I'm not working when I should be in my office seeing clients, maybe seeing clients on Zoom, and I've got time in between clients, I feel like I need to constantly be doing stuff. I'm not great at taking my own advice and saying that actually this is a really challenging time and that's okay. I've got a baby on the way as well, and work, and I'm finishing my doctorate, and I'm trying to get GetPsyched moving more. I need to be better at recognising that these are difficult times, and it's okay to find it challenging, because I do find it challenging at times, and sometimes I put it to the back burner. So a little bit of self-disclosure there. I know that often on GetPsyched I can often give these advice and these principles and make it sound like I've got it all together, which I absolutely don't. I never want that to be misconstrued. So yeah, I struggle with this stuff too. There also needs to be a level of commitment, and I'm reminded of a form of therapy that I use with clients often called acceptance and commitment therapy. In a very basic way, it says that we need to accept the situations that we can't change. We need to accept feeling anxious in difficult circumstances. That's okay, we need to accept that. Or we need to accept the contextual issues that we can't change. But we need to also recognise and commit to the changes that we can make. So that could be everyday things. That could be like implementing new routines or new schedules in our daily lives. That could be a really positive way to commit to change and push ourselves towards what's most important for us. When we're trying to manage our health during tough times, there's also something about getting back to the basics. I think what can happen, and I see this in clients, and I see this from people who interact with me and GetPsyched, who think that this kind of stuff is really complex. And in some ways it can be, of course. Managing our mental health is not difficult, particularly when it comes during difficult times. But there is something about getting back to the basics. Doing the kind of things on a daily basis that you enjoy, that you get well-being from. You know, I remember some of the times in my life when I struggled most with my mental health. I stopped doing the things that were basic for me, that were every day. I felt in some way that I had to change, or I had to do something drastic in order to manage my mental health better, when actually what was important for me was to get back to the basics. So at one point in my life when I was really struggling with my mental health, I stopped going to the gym, and that's like a daily ritual for me. I do that pretty much every day. Getting back to the basics of doing that was a really positive routine, a really positive intervention that helped manage that mental health during those tough times. And for you, it could be something like, you know, having a really nice bath at the end of the day, or going for a walk throughout the day, or, you know, eating a healthy meal. These are the kind of things that can be really simple, really practical as well. It helps you get back to the basics, and that's really important. There's also something here about slowing down. And I think in particular during the summer 2020, if you're watching it now, or if you're reflecting on this in years to come about what happened during the coronavirus outbreak, slowing down I think is really important. In some ways we're being forced to slow down in lockdown, but in other ways mentally we're at higher speeds than we've ever been, because things are so uncertain. We need to appreciate a little bit of that neurology, that cortisol level can spike really, really high when we're trying to be fast paced, when we're trying to change things, when we're so stressed out, we don't know what's happening. We need to learn to slow down, to allow that cortisol to come down, and then the brain, the hippocampus, the thalamus, the amygdala, all these other parts of the brain that we need can do their jobs appropriately. We need to allow that cortisol level to reduce. So how do we do that? Well, we do things like getting back to the basics, doing the things that are important to you, doing the things that give you a sense of well-being. We also need to teach our bodies to slow down. So that could be in the form of meditative practices, that could be in the form of breathing practices, relaxation techniques, all of these things, committing to parts of our day where we do that, where we allow our bodies to shut down, where we allow our brains to shut down a little bit. Slowing down is a really, really effective means for this. One of the other things for me, the final point I think is really important that we make here is about gratitude. And I speak about gratitude quite a lot on GetPsyched. But when we're trying to manage our mental health during difficult times, we have to think about gratitude for the things that we have currently. Now, when I go into this, I'm going to say this isn't easy. I'm not making this out to be simple. I'm not saying just slow down, that's really straightforward. Or, just do the things that you enjoy before, that's really straightforward. Or just show gratitude, that's really easy. These things aren't easy, but they are appropriate. They are important that we do. So if you've experienced the loss of a loved one, if you've experienced the loss of a job or the loss of a relationship, there are still elements of gratitude that you can exhibit, and it's important that you do. If you've lost somebody, if a challenging life circumstance has enveloped and your mental health is suffering, maybe off the back of a crisis or a trauma, maybe the loss of a loved one, you can start to, in time, gradually show levels of gratitude for the time that you got to spend with that individual. That's a really effective means. It's not straightforward. It doesn't come immediately. But focusing on the gratitude of what you do have. I'm thinking about during coronavirus and during the lockdown, I've been able to be grateful for spending more time with my wife. That's been a really positive thing for me. So showing levels of gratitude is important. It helps regulate that cortisol level. It helps us slow down. It helps us also manage our mental health better when we are experiencing those tough times. Gratitude is vital. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching this week's episode of GetPsyched. This week we've been taking a look at how we manage our mental health better during difficult times. If you have got some questions about some of the points I've raised today, or you've got some of your own points that you think I've missed, then please comment down in the video, like it, share it. If you've been enjoying GetPsyched as a whole, guys, make sure to subscribe to the channel. You can hit that little bell next to the subscribe button as well, and you've got weekly reminders every time I upload. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and hopefully catch you next week.